Okay, thank you so much everyone for joining today for our next speaker, Dr. Teresa Brown, speaking on critical zone studies in the High Knob area. I did just want to take a moment once again to make sure that everyone knows the presenter has no conflicts of interest or disclosures to make regarding the content of this presentation, and the session is being recorded. So by remaining at the webinar, you're giving your consent to be recorded. If you do not consent to being recorded, you may disconnect at any time. All attendees are in listen-only mode, and questions will be taken at the end. If you would like to ask a question, you can either request to speak at the end, or you can hit the little Q&A box in the toolbar that should be accessible to you, and we will make sure your questions are answered. We are also live on Facebook live stream, so if there are questions there, we'll be making sure to monitor those as well. Thank you so much, and I'll let Dr. Brown take it away.
All right. Well, let me go ahead and hit my share screen here. All righty. And we'll have to flip to the beginning here. All right, is everybody able to see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, well, I am from this area originally, but I'm relatively new. I've been in Knoxville for the past 10 or so years, 15 years or so. And so I'm really happy to be back in the Southwest Virginia and teaching at UVA-wise. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about this. It's kind of a shotgun approach to the type of research that we're doing there, what we're getting started on, where we hope to go. And I'm actually going to start with what I know the most about, and I'm going to end up with what I know the least about. So if you detect kind of a decrease in detail, then that's because I'm moving from what I know most about to what I know least about. So here we go. I'm talking about critical zone studies because the critical zone is a really important, let's see, I'm trying to advance my slides here. This is not working. You might have to do it in a different mode. Let me try this again. Okay, share screen. We're going to try it in this mode. How about that? All right. And now I can advance slides. Maybe. Here we go. So the critical zone is a kind of a different way of thinking about the environment. It requires an interdisciplinary approach to investigating all the spheres basically that interact, right, to support life. So the critical zone is defined as basically that realm from just above the tree canopy all the way down below groundwater. And so it's this interface, right, where the living and the non-living interact, where rock interacts with tree roots, plant roots, with the soil, with the exchange of solutes and gases, and then all the organisms that depend on this zone to basically support life, to cycle nutrients and energy. And so this, as I said, requires this interdisciplinary approach. It's too complex. Nobody can be an expert on everything, right? And so you have to work as a team to basically look at these processes that sculpt our landscape, that control the health of our soils and our water systems, and that also affect our climate and basically the environment that we live in. So it's a complex way to go about science. It's basically throwing off your blinders and grabbing the hands of those other disciplines, the ecologists, biologists, chemists, engineers that all can help you understand this system. And basically, this zone is essential for the essential ecosystem services that life requires. So there has been a great deal of federal funding thrown at these critical zone observatories throughout, well, not only the United States, but all across the world that are run by different countries. But this is a map that's showing you the karst, or basically the limestone terrains of the United States. And I don't have the critical zone observatories on here, but they're pretty much scattered all around from California to Iowa to Pennsylvania, but they're focused on bedrock that's basically either igneous or metamorphic bedrock, or sedimentary rocks such as sandstones and shales. And so what's been left out is this limestone terrain where things happen much differently than they do on other types of bedrock. So that's why bedrock matters. And so here's just kind of a generalized geologic map of the Upper Tennessee River watershed. You can see Virginia spilling over into Tennessee there, and these long stringy lines are basically the valley and ridge province, where you have ridges and valleys that are underlain by, different types of sedimentary rock, basically sandstone, shale, and limestone. And typically the valleys are underlain by limestone, but also limestone can creep way up the slopes, as we know in the High Knob and the Upper Powell Valley area. And so limestone can actually form a significant part of this terrain, which impacts the way groundwater is recharged from the surface. So once again, all of our precipitation, our rainfall, our snow melt moves through that critical zone to reach our essential aquifers, and through a different type of porosity, depending on if you're in a sandstone aquifer or a limestone aquifer. And so a lot of processes happen in this recharge zone. A lot of natural filtration takes place, a lot of energy and gas exchange occurs. And so here's a beautiful shot of our Powell Valley. And we know that basically some of the most important, the U.S. Geological Survey, this is a side here, doesn't really call our groundwater systems aquifers here, which is kind of annoying to me. But they are indeed groundwater systems, and they do sustain our rivers. And a lot of people basically get their drinking water from groundwater systems, from karst wells and karst springs. So to me, they are aquifers, and we're just going to forget about the terminology for now. But the most important of these systems are pretty much move through karst or limestone cave systems to replenish our springs and our rivers. So this adds a whole another layer of complexity to figuring out what's happening with our recharge once it infiltrates that rock, right, that soil in that critical zone, and disappears into the subsurface. So if it's moving through cave systems, it's much more difficult to figure out exactly where it returns to the surface. But the most important point I want to make here is that it's really hard to distinguish between surface water and groundwater in these types of karst terrains, because water that's flowing happily across the surface could disappear suddenly into a cave, or what we call swallow holes or swallets, to become groundwater that moves through the subsurface for perhaps miles before appearing on the surface again as a spring that recharges the Clinch of the Powell rivers. So I guess one of the first targets that I'm trying to address here in Southwest Virginia is to basically figure out what is the long-term resilience of our groundwater systems in this area. We know that compared to surface water, groundwater generally requires less treatment than surface water does for drinking. It tends to be much more stable and less affected by changes in temperature and pressure climatically. Cave systems and groundwater systems that flow through them, the temperatures tend to be relatively stable throughout the year. And then we're really not sure, because we don't have really good baseline data in the first place, we're really not sure how to go about determining how climate change in the future is going to affect these shallow aquifers or groundwater systems. We suspect that the climate change is going to have major impacts on the water cycle. just based on predictions and what we're already seeing in other parts of the world. So as the climate changes, weather patterns change, timing of rainfall events, monsoon seasons, those patterns change. We know it's going to be far more likely to have extreme storm events and unprecedented weather patterns as the climate warms up and can hold more water and lead to more violent storms. We're also seeing longer droughts and hotter wildfires, especially in the western U.S., inland flooding that has not been precedented in the South, right? We're, hopefully somewhat blessed here in the mountains, but we're not immune to these types of floods. It's happening all around us in North Carolina and parts of Southwest Virginia recently. And we also are basically concerned about the prospect for depleting our groundwater reservoirs if these water cycle patterns change. There's also, the specter out there of legacy pollution or basically orphan contaminated sites that can impact our water systems and the people that are using them, as well as this whole category called emerging contaminants of concern, which is a whole slew of chemicals that people are beginning to see show up in their water supplies. And they're not even necessarily regulated yet, or even well studied or well known. So those are kind of some of the general concerns that we have about the resilience of our water systems. And so what we like to do, and what I've done, throughout my academic career, is basically use caves and karst as a laboratory or as a way to get inside the critical zone, because it's just it's a fantastic opportunity to have access to the subsurface that you really don't have in other type of bedrock terrain. Maybe volcanic terrains, you'll have some, lava tube caves where you can access the subsurface, but karst is pretty much the place where you have, unprecedented access to basically see and measure these processes in the critical zone. One thing that we're doing in Southwest Virginia is we're actually working with other state agencies such as the Department of Conservation, Department of Health, Department of Environmental Quality in some cases, to trace these underground flow paths through these karst systems to figure out where that groundwater is going after it disappears underground, and also using that for habitat conservation purposes. In caves, we have a number of unique species of fauna that basically are adapted to these unique environments, these niche habitats. And so they're very vulnerable to pollution from the surface, and especially non-point source pollution such as sediment and siltation. And so if we want to try to identify problem areas and try to protect a species, such as the Rye Cove isopod over in Scott County, it's a very unique critter that only is found in that particular, area in those cave systems. We have to use non-toxic dyes to try to trace those flow paths in the subsurface. And so we're working to kind of update that information and add to those maps and determine if possibly failing septic systems or maybe cattle standing in some of these sink points could be contributing to contamination of the water systems and affecting the health of this species. So that's one student project that we have going on right now. And of course, it requires that we work with landowners and work with cooperative landowners. And so it takes a little bit longer to meet everybody and explain to them what you're trying to do. But the vast majority of people are all for it once they understand what the purpose is. Other things that we're doing, we have a fellowship in natural sciences, basically stipend award that's awarded to students every year. And one of those students, Liv Salazar, is doing a project to investigate what type of microorganisms live on a cave formation known as moon milk. And she's working with Dr. Bruce Cahoon, who is our basically algae and microbiology specialist at UVA-Wise. and he's an expert on eDNA, or using environmental DNA to determine basically what kind of critters are living in a particular setting. And in this case, we're collecting tiny chunks of moon milk. We have a permit from the state to do this, and taking it back to the lab and extracting the DNA. And we're even getting some high resolution electron microscope photographs of these microorganisms that are living on the moon milk. And so our next challenge will be to figure out why they're doing what they're doing, and what is it about these particular formations that is special? Are they help creating this moon milk? Are they helping deposit it? Or are they actually mining it for energy purposes? So those results are just coming in. It's pretty exciting. One of my most important research areas that I basically worked on in my PhD dissertation, and I would like to bring and get started here in Southwest Virginia, is looking at carbon cycling, and especially in cave systems and groundwater. Basically, organic carbon drives all life, and it's a backbone for the biomolecules that life needs to survive. And so tracing organic carbon through systems, basically tracing any kind of plant or animal matter as it's decomposed through the critical zone, is a big challenge. Being able to measure carbon or as dissolved organic matter is important for public water supplies, because at certain times of the year, buildups of organic matter can interact with disinfection processes for public drinking water, such as chlorination, and cause trihalomethane formation, which are potentially dangerous and regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. So it's to everybody's benefit to understand more about dissolved organic matter, just the natural dissolved organic matter as it moves through the system, and what times of the year it may peak, and how it varies over time and distance. One thing we did in a Kentucky cave system, and we're currently getting geared up to do this kind of work in cave systems in Southwest Virginia, is to look at how the dissolved organic matter changes with distance downstream. And in this case, you can see these basically fluorescent thumbprints that are showing as you move downstream through different parts of the cave system, and you're receiving different inputs from the surface. You can see how the shape of that thumbprint changes, and that's actually indicating the increase in nitrogen compounds as you're moving downstream through the system. And based on other evidence that we have, more hydrochemical evidence, there's actually a link between the cycling of organic matter by microorganisms, the decomposition of that organic matter from the surface, and basically inputs from organisms such as trees. This is a photo from a lava tube cave, but in many of the caves here in Southwest Virginia, we can see tree roots actually passing right through the cave passages. And in some cases, they're dangling in cave passages where you've got nearly 100% humidity. In other cases, they're moving on through the cave passage down to deeper levels. We know that tree roots and roots of other vegetation actually secrete organic acids, and organic acids can not only contribute to organic carbon and change the composition of that organic carbon, but they can also accelerate the dissolution of the limestone itself. So they can actually help create caves, which is really fascinating. And so figuring out the links between this part of, all of these components in this part of the critical zone is a huge task, but it's something I've been working on for a while, and I intend to move forward with. And the students love going underground. But there's been a recent, very bizarre development that some of you all might be really interested in. There's a brand new paper that just came out in Science within the last couple months, I think. It's called Plastics in the Earth System. And I have a couple slides from that paper that are pretty sobering, especially if you're an organic matter person, right? And so this, basically this big overall schematic that's showing basically the movement of plastic and the buildup of plastics in natural systems. This is based on 2015 data. And you can see that basically the blue arrows are the processes such as incineration that would basically dispose of plastics, such as you incinerate it and release more CO2 to the atmosphere, versus, the black arrows that are basically less well-known processes that might be contributing microplastics, especially to the land surface, such as atmospheric deposition or the decomposition of, waste plastic that ends up in rivers and is slowly over time photodegraded and, into this basically size fractions that very much resemble sand, silt, and clay. And so these authors are making the case for, if we're studying carbon cycling, we've got to make provisions for the artificial inorganic component of carbon that's being contributed by, this massive buildup of plastics in the environment. Right now, natural organic matter way exceeds the amount of plastics that's contributing to organic carbon or carbon cycling, but plastic-based carbon is building up in the environment really rapidly, so it can't be ignored. It has to basically be addressed along with the organic carbon. And I think there's one more here that basically shows a schematic of as plastic breaks down, it basically segregates into a surface layer in the water column, a suspended load, just like clays or silt might be carried in the suspended load of a flooding river, for example. And then there's also a bed load, just like sand and pebbles might move along, skip along the substrate in the bottom of a stream and be gradually broken down into smaller and smaller particles. So that's a problem. So I'm going to have to basically update my own toolbox in order to incorporate plastics into my organic carbon studies, especially in water systems. But moving back to what we're doing in rivers, because our groundwater systems are directly linked and contribute to and basically sustain river flow in the Clinch and Powell, we're also examining the surface water because we really want to know, what's going on with our rivers in terms of the prevailing land use in Southwest Virginia. And so this is a study that the UVA Wise Chancellor funded in 2019, before I even started full time at the college. And here we're using basically student labor with a bunch of portable meters and collecting water samples to look at these non-point sources or unpermitted sources of silt and fecal indicator bacteria, especially. And so the center photo in this slide, you see the kind of the glowing squares there. That is our Call Alert system for measuring fecal indicator bacteria such as E. coli and totocoliform in stream water and spring water. And it works very well. It's basically a process that's been accepted by the DEQ and the health department. So it's a very inexpensive process. So we've been applying these tools to study non-point source pollution in the region, and especially to answer questions about which communities are having, I guess, the worst impacts in terms of their wastewater infrastructure, straight piping, leaking sewer lines. A lot of these are really older communities that have never had proper or adequate wastewater treatment. And so the Department of Health, Lennowisco Health District, uses this type of information to, basically develop grants, federal grants that can go to improve sewer and water service to these communities. And so they basically helped us locate some of the sites that we began with in 2019. And we spilled over into the Powell Valley as well, because we were also looking at some septic systems that were alternative septic systems that might not be maintained over time, because once folks get a permit for an alternative septic system, which is one that wouldn't be approved for us, a standard conventional septic system. They usually have a chlorinator attached to it because there's not enough soil depth there for adequate soil treatment. And over time, people tend to stop, refreshing the chlorine tablets in these systems. And so they can revert back to, sources of fecal indicator bacteria or fecal bacteria, which is bad for everybody. This is some of the beginning data that we started with. The Department of Environmental Quality does this ambient water quality monitoring, but because there's only one person that covers all of Southwest Virginia, and that's almost, I think, from Galax all the way to the tip of Lee County, they can only do that water quality monitoring on a rotating basis. So it might be, 5-10 years before they'll get back to a certain place. And so our goal was to try to fill in those gaps. And so we use their data and the Lennowisco data as a starting point. And my animation isn't working here, it looks like. Let's see. Let me move this and see if we can see the data itself. Oh, that's helpful. All right. And so you can see here, this is the 2018-2019 data. This is the average data for the whole, spring, fall series that we did. And you can see this parameter called specific conductivity is a measure of the dissolved minerals in the water. And so you see here in basically the karst areas and shale areas, you have some fairly low specific conductivity. But as you move into the mining areas, you're getting basically dissolved minerals in the water that are really high, right? And so that is probably salinity and some dissolved metals. And so there's a follow-up study to this that a student has launched that we'll talk about in just a minute. And this particular chart does not show the fecal indicator bacteria. But for the next one, we can show you that. So the next project we moved on to was in 2020, of course, right at the beginning of the pandemic, was the Clinch Water Watch. Here we worked with the Russell County Public Library and the Clinch Valley Soil and Water Conservation District. They actually were awarded a Citizens Water Quality Monitor grant by DEQ. And we jumped in there to basically UVA-wise could support them with personnel, students, as well as laboratory analyses, our call alert system, our portable monitors. And we also helped them train the volunteers. So the idea was that we would train, high school teachers and their students, scout groups, other interested citizens in Russell County to go out once a month with us and to monitor a number of sites on the Clinch. And, we were looking from basically all the way from Southwest Virginia Community College all the way down to Dant. And we're looking at tributaries as sites on the main stem. And the goal of this project was to not only, learn more about the health of the river and try to home in on some of the problem spots, but also to support the development of the new Clinch River State Park, which everyone's excited about. And we know that there are cows in the creek problems with the Clinch, and the Clinch Valley Soil and Water Conservation District is done great job on getting, farmers the resources they need to develop alternate water systems and better fencing management for cows. But, we have to have the river has to meet recreational contact standards in order for people to happily fall in and blissfully swim in the river, right? And so this is where our study came in. We also, because we were monitoring on the Clinch, we also had to pay attention to all that karst because most of the Powell and the Clinch rivers are basically recharged by springs that flow through caves. So that was also another consideration. This is our map, the map of the sites that we monitored. Kelly Delph, the coordinator for the library, logged our volunteer hours and was able to report that to DEQ. We monitored all the way from the input of the Little River into the Clinch, and monitored several tributaries, some of the main sites on the Clinch, and our last main stem site was down in Carterton, and then we finished up in Lick Creek in Dant. So it didn't quite work out the way we wanted to, because after everyone got sent home for the pandemic, it was really hard to get our volunteers that we trained out, except for a few retirees who religiously showed up for us every time at a few of the sites. And so we proceeded to go ahead and monitor in masks. The center, here we are, let's see, on the left here, we're up on Lewis Creek in Honeacre. On the right here, we're up in Archer Canoe Launch. And in the center here are some of our test kits. Some of our preliminary results, we're compiling this now to turn it into DEQ. And so we can see the results here from the top of the well, from the Little River site, all the way down to the mainstream site at Carterton. You can see the average E. coli levels, and they're pretty high, right? The turbidity levels, basically they all peak. The E. coli and turbidity both peak during rain events. Nitrates are relatively low downstream. This is upstream near the town of Lebanon, right, where we have nitrates around 5, nitrates around 4 at the Little River. And those specific conductivity values are reflected mainly of limestone and karst. Let me move this one back up here. This bottom graph, these are the fecal indicator bacteria spikes from basically throughout that event, from our monitoring events from February 2020 all the way to March 21. We're still monitoring. We'll be going out in a couple of weeks for maybe our last round of monitoring in middle October. But what you see here is you can see these spikes of E. coli. They're all correlating with rain events, right? And this is the maximum detection limit for the call alert system. So they could actually be much higher. These units are most probable number of colony forming units, and those are basically the units that the call alert kit uses, but it has an upper limit. So we really don't know how high these go. We think that this is probably related to less failing septic systems in cattle and more so failing wastewater systems, because so many of them are older on the Clinch River. I'm going to switch over to basically another PowerPoint quickly to show you another student's FINS research. She followed up on the specific conductivity values that were so different between the carbonate or limestone rock and the sandstone rock. And so I'm going to click out of this and click over to this one. Did that carry forward for everybody? Hopefully. And so in this particular study, we were looking at this parameter called specific conductivity that basically measures the electrical conductance of the water based on how many solids or dissolved minerals are there. And so I'll skip through this and show you some results. This is just basically the type of basically sandstone sites that we monitored versus the sites of, the type of limestone terrains that we monitored. This is the map of the area, and this has since been expanded. So we had a lot of sites in the karst, basically this line here. Everything below that is limestone. And we had a whole lot of sites that were downstream from old or active mining areas. So we were really interested in seeing how high that specific conductivity went. And as we suspected, the highest specific conductivity were in areas associated with resource extraction. Here you can kind of see how these sites cluster in terms of acidity or pH versus the dissolved metals. So the carbonate sites were pretty pretty much well together, and as were the sandstone sites, or the clastic sites as we call them. And then we got to our metals analysis, and we found significant differences in a lot of salinity inducing components, elements such as sodium, magnesium, some metals such as copper, zinc, strontium, cadmium, barium, lead. And so Rachel plotted those up in some interesting ways. In this one, she's comparing basically the clastic or the sandstone sites versus the carbonate sites. And these are looking at some of the most common elements, such as sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. And you can see, basically orders of magnitude difference in terms of parts per billion levels, even very, very low levels between the two types of sites underlain by carbonate versus clastic bedrock. This is one of my favorites. It's showing some of the less abundant elements, and it clearly breaks out elements such as zinc and strontium, right? Cadmium and even barium into these two, actively mined sites underlain by clastic rock versus, we even looked at quarries, limestone quarries, and they still fell in in carbonate rock, and they still fell down here in this area. We use high knob. We typically use high knob as a control, right? Because it's such a beautifully protected area. And so these dots down here are basically streams that are flowing off of high knob. They pretty much got 0% of nothing in them. So thank goodness for high knob as the control site. All right, so this data is being plotted up and written up for an abstract that this student will hopefully present at the Geological Society of America meeting next spring. All right, I'm going to go back one more time to where I left off. Okay, so some new research that we're getting started on that I'm pretty excited about is we are looking at soil carbon. And my ultimate goal here is to start thinking about how to improve the capacity for carbon sequestration in soils in Southwest Virginia, whether they're degraded agricultural soils or degraded, mineland soils. And to try to start even, hopefully even thinking about using organic amendments such as compost to rebuild some of these soils. In this case, we're working with, and once again, my animations aren't going to work, so I'll slide this guy over here. We're working with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, their natural heritage section that manages the natural area preserves throughout Southwest Virginia. This particular preserve is the Cedars Natural Area Preserve down below Jonesville. And we're working with some folks from Lincoln Memorial University that have similar interests. Specifically, they have a soil science class that's being taught this fall. I'll be teaching a soil science class next spring. And so LMU students are collecting before data, and I'll be collecting after data for the next couple of years. And so what are we collecting before and after? Well, we're looking at prescribed burns. Let's move these back over here. The Cedars Natural Area Preserve is important for a bunch of different reasons, partially because they also have some very rare species that live in the caves, in addition to rare plant species that are living right on this nearly bare limestone or on these really thin soils. And so the orange areas in this map on the left are areas that are going to be burnt, basically using prescribed controlled burns this fall. And then there are control sites around them so we can compare the before and after effects of the fire. On the right here, you can see our sampling transect. We've got about 20 sample sites along this transect from the unburned area onto the burned area, where we've collected our background samples, and we're going to be looking at soil organic carbon, soil organic matter, bulk density of the soil, and other parameters that would, attest to the health of the soil. And so that's an exciting area of research that I hope will lead to more work on abandoned mine lands, and to hopefully start comparing different types of sites and different types of soils and different land uses in the future. In order to, it's really hard to, soils can hold up to, or basically hold up to four times more carbon than is in the atmosphere, and about that much more carbon than is in living biomass. But it's just really hard to measure soil carbon because soils are so heterogeneous. They vary from just even from 5 to 10 feet apart. So we're working and reading the literature and reaching out to folks at Virginia Tech who have shown an interest in working with us down here at WISE in our corner of the state to do, I guess, more quantitative analysis on soil carbon and soil organic matter. So that's kind of where the limit of my direct firsthand knowledge ends. And now I'm stepping into totally new territory, but it's super exciting. And it's something that's going to be really important, I think, for High Knob. Let's see. Next slide. There it is. And that is the proposed High Knob Meteorological Tower. This is a proposal from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service. Our National Weather Service office in Morristown is heading this up. And so let me go. They sent me just a few slides. This is a kind of example of the different towers they have. They have a meteorological tower. These are really tall towers that collect all kinds of interesting data, especially on these high elevation sites. In the Blue Ridge and the Appalachians. I know they have a site at Elkmont in the Smokies. They have a site at Big South Fork on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee. And they really want to get a site on High Knob because it's just so important meteorologically. So let me skip to their slides really quickly. And so, yeah, here we go. So this project is just at the very beginning. They've basically modeled it after their other collaborations. And this is basically going to be through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration using their Air Resources Laboratory and their Atmospheric Turbulence and Diffusion Division based out of Oak Ridge National Lab. So that would be very cool. And this Oak Ridge bunch would actually be responsible for erecting the tower. And what we need to do is develop a stronger partnership here in this area. And this is where hopefully the Clinch Coalition can help me, because I've been out of the area for a while. I've lost a lot of the contacts that I used to have. Faces and people have changed. And so hopefully you all can help us try to put the pieces together to make this a successful collaboration. What they want to do is to basically erect this tower to provide real-time atmospheric weather data that would be available to the public and to the National Weather Service that would basically improve the resilience and the preparedness, especially for weather emergencies and hazardous weather conditions to the communities of Southwest Virginia. And so it can also be a stepping stone toward building this long-term database for climate environmental studies in the High Knob area. We hope to basically work with the Department of Wildlife Resources and the Forest Service to basically, hopefully, establish this tower near the antenna station, that's pre-existing antenna station that's already on High Knob, because we have to have electricity. We have to have a landline in order to call the station, in order to download the information in real time. So these are some of the specifics about the proposed station. The tools that they'll actually have on the station themselves will include this pyranometer, which is a solar irradiance measurement device, rain gauges, of course, wind monitors for direction, wind speed indicators, temperature and relative humidity indicators, And, there's ways that they can basically study circulation patterns and the fairly unique snowfall conditions that they're very interested on High Knob. This is the type of website data that would be provided, and you can even get a mobile version of this website in real time. And so, of course, a bunch of these squiggly lines doesn't mean anything to us, but to
Dr. Brown, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not, I believe your screen sharing might be off.
Okay. Well, that's not good.
I just want to make sure you knew.
I didn't know that, so let me go back. All right, let me try this again. Okay. All right, can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so I'll go backwards here then, since I'm already toward the end of this. But this is an example of the type of display that you could get actually on your cell phones for real-time data from this tower. And these are the types of instruments that the tower would have, basically the wind instrument. All right, relative humidity and temperature, the wind monitor, solar irradiance and rain gauge. And so these are the types of basically tools that they would have on this system. And so that's what we hoped. We started these discussions before COVID shut down everything. And then, of course, everything kind of fell apart. Offices closed and agencies closed, and it was really hard to get a hold of people. So now we're hoping to start this discussion back up and try to figure out how to get the logistics on the ground that we would need in order to get this new type of weather station established. So that is basically okay. I'm screen sharing. So I'll go back to the beginning here just to give you a pretty picture. And I'll say, and that is basically my presentation. Sorry that you didn't get all of the slides, but hopefully you got enough information to at least ask some questions and kind of get an overall idea of the things we're tackling here at the college. And we're always looking for collaborators and volunteers and interested citizens to join us out in the field. All right, so any questions?
Yes, at this moment, if anyone has any questions, please make sure to use the Q&A function down at the bottom of your Zoom. You can also request to speak or raise your hand and ask them that way. And thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for your amazing presentation. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, Chris, I'll have you go ahead.
Thank you. Great presentation, Teresa. And as a retired educator, I'm really pleased to see the activities and the research that your students at UVA-Wise have been conducting. It amazes me all the projects that they're involved with in some very serious science. Later today, I'm doing a program on dragonflies and damselflies. And I know Dr. Rodriguez a few years ago did a really nice study with her students of Odonata. And I'm wondering your view of using them as a bioindicator for water quality.
Oh, yeah, I think that would be a fantastic addition, to the salinity studies and the organic matter studies. There are some folks from Virginia Tech who are also interested, and they're writing a grant proposal, I think, right now, to come visit our streams in Southwest Virginia and look at how carbon cycling could be affecting aquatic ecosystems. And that would be a really cool addition to that more systematic study. So yeah, I'll have to keep that in mind and add you to the partner list and pick your brain about that, when those things, if that comes through for us.
As a quick follow-up on that, Of course, I'm with the Virginia Master Naturalists, and we would be very interested in assisting with that study if it comes to pass. We have a few teachers in our area who have done a lot of projects with students with macroinvertebrates in the streams. And so our master naturalists would be very interested in assisting the UVA-Y students with a project like that.
Oh, that's cool. I'll talk to Dr. Rodriguez about this and start, getting her excited about it. One thing that happens to us, and I guess you can kind of tell that from the slideshow, is I am in danger of getting spread too thin. And so the more people I can pull in, the better.
Thank you.
All right, and Miss Sharon has a question. Raise your hand.
Yes, this presentation just so much in it and so interesting. And I just want to say on behalf of the Clinch Coalition, we're ready to begin talking with you at any time how we can partner with you in your work and support it, whether it's through education or other environmental activities. But I really learned a lot from this.
Oh, well, thank you, Sharon. And, I'm so excited about that. I can't wait to get more involved with the Clinch Coalition. I know y'all can be a big help.
Great.
Excellent, thank you. And then we have a question from Bonnie. Wondering if Wayne Browning is involved with you in the weather study.
Oh, well, I haven't seen Wayne much since he left the university. I know he's still working on microclimate issues. And this particular Met Tower is pretty much all the impetus for it is all pretty much being driven by this group out of Oak Ridge. And then there's this layer between us, here at WISE, where they want to put the tower, and the group at Oak Ridge, right? So this group in Morristown is kind of interacting between us. So that's, I think, one reason why it's kind of not really all put together yet, because we've got so many different folks in their own, I guess, little areas that aren't, it's we need to put together a team, right? And I think Wayne would be a really important part of that team. So it's just, I guess it's incumbent upon me to make sure that I can pull all these people together. And in fact, I don't even know, who with the Department of Wildlife Resources I would actually reach out to about this. So that's kind of like where I'm struggling, is helping to pull together the right people to get this team going. So yeah, I think Wayne would be a valued member of the team.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Brown. Did anyone have any final questions for our lovely presenter? Okay, thank you all so much for joining us for our 1 o'clock topic for today with Dr. Brown, and we will be going into our next presenter. Let me put the schedule up for you guys at 4 p.m. And then be Dragonflies and Damselflies with Chris Allgaier. We will see you guys then. The waiting room, as usual, will be left open for you to come and go as you please. Thank you again, Dr. Brown, for your very informative presentation today. And I hope that you all have a good rest of your day. We'll see you in 2 hours.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.